Good morning. My name is Kitty Hawks, and I'm a board member of the Municipal Art Society. The Garment District is Manhattan's last bustling hive of industry. Its workrooms, fabric shops, button and trim shops have been a resource for young and established designers for years. But recently, they have begun to suffer from economic pressures. In response to the city's considerations regarding rezoning parts of the Garment District, the Design Trust for Public Space and the Council of Fashion Designers of America undertook the study Made in Midtown to help evaluate the Garment District's role as a vibrant hub. MAS contributed research to the report on foreign fashion capitals along with the Design Trust. It organized very informative panel discussions this summer. What we learned is that not only is the Garment District integral to the success of Fashion Week, but it's critical for garment production, research, and development. We will be discussing today how New York City can continue to be the fashion capital of the world without the small businesses, which are at its core. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our panelists. Our moderator is Yoli Tang. Yoli established her fashion label, Yoli Incorporated, in 1981. Her work has been featured in numerous exhibitions and is part of the permanent collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She received the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Fashion in 2004. She has been at the forefront of addressing the Garment District zoning issues. She initiated the Made in Midtown project and mobilized an effort to focus on this issue. Notably, she has just moved all of her business operations, including her studio, showroom, shipping facility, and retail space, which I might add she's never had before, into one building on West 38th Street. So go shopping at the break. 35 West 38th. Her new building adds vibrancy to the street and is a show of her faith in the future of the Garment District as a creative working neighborhood. Jerome Chu, a landscape architect, is the director of programs at the Design Trust for Public Space. Jerome joins us with extensive knowledge of the inner workings of the Garment District gained from his involvement in Made in Midtown. Joe Ferrara is a director of the Garment Center Supplier Association. He's been working in the district for 23 years and has been directly involved in several startup companies. One of them, Ferrara Manufacturing, is now the leading contract manufacturer of designing clothing in the United States. Andrew Rosen is the founder and CEO of Theory, a leading global contemporary fashion company. He is also a partner in the Rag & Bone, Alice & Olivia, and Griffin businesses, and is the third generation of his family to be an industry leader in the Garment District, working to innovate and evolve the American fashion landscape. Madeline Wills is the Executive Vice President of the Planning, Development, and Maritime Division of the New York City Economic Development Corporation. At EDC, Madeline is responsible for many of the city's area-wide revitalization plans. From 2001 to 2005, she was chair of Community Board 1 in Lower Manhattan, where she negotiated many significant projects for her community, including creating new public schools, parks, and community recreation facilities. I would like to thank all of our panelists for their participation, as well as American Express for sponsoring this event. Now I'm pleased to hand it over to Yoli.
Thank you, Kitty, and thank you to the Municipal Art Society for taking an interest in the Garment District and the fashion industry. What is the vision for the future of the Garment District? I got into that conversation when I heard a proposal to rezone and put the light manufacturing industry that occupies over 1 million square feet of space in the Garment District into one building at the corner of 8th Avenue and 38th Street. How do you do that? It was apparent that there was a perception of an industry in decline, but there was no way to quantify or value what exists there today. So, my partner, Jörg Schwartz, and I wrote a request for a proposal to the Design Trust for Public Space, which resulted in the study Made in Midtown, conducted in partnership with the Council of Fashion Designers of America. The study showed that the industry today is a thriving ecosystem, a hub for research and development, and still a neighborhood where a kid can go to realize his or her dream. Today, we recognize the importance of the garment district and its significance to the city. We also know that while its value is undeniable, there is constant pressure for the district to evolve and grow. How do we enable growth, make the district viable, and yet satisfy all the stakeholders? We're here today with a panel of experts to address this question. I can't wait to hear what they have to say. So Jerome, as the program director of the Design Trust for Public Space, I know that the Design Trust study identified a number of clear strengths that the garment district has today. What are these strengths and how can they be leveraged?
Well, I think, first of all, there are many strengths, and I would encourage everyone to go to madeinmidtown.org and look at all of the diagrams and maps and illustrations of all of those strengths. But I'll just mention 4 very quickly. And I'm going to cheat a little bit and borrow from the previous speaker because I think he hit on 2 of the strengths. The first strength I want to talk about is jobs and density. There are some 3,500 manufacturing and supply firms between 23rd Street and 59th Street in Manhattan. That's not jobs, that's individual small businesses in manufacturing and supply. Just within the 5 or 6 square block area of the garment district, there's hundreds of businesses supporting thousands of working and middle-class jobs. 40 manufacturing firms per block, roughly, within the garment district. That density, that proximity of those firms enables incredible creative activity within the fashion industry. It allows designers to oversee their product. It allows them to work quickly, more quickly than if they produce overseas. And it enables the kind of high-end fashion that has made New York one of the fashion capitals of the world. So jobs, proximity, density, that's a huge strength. And that leads directly into what the previous speaker was talking about in terms of innovation. What the garment district produces today is not the mass production of 50, 60, 70 years ago, but innovation. New ideas, new styles that the rest of the country and the rest of the world follows. A third strength is entrepreneurial activity. New York is hands down the fashion startup capital of the world. There's no other city in the world where, as Yoli said, an emerging designer, could be someone straight out of school, could be someone switching careers, can find the resources that you have in Midtown, in New York City in general, to produce a line. As a startup, you've got nothing. You have no money, you have no brand, you have no staff, you have no equipment, but you can find those things in New York City, and particularly in Midtown, and particularly in the garment district. And then finally, I would say that a huge strength is, again, what the last speaker mentioned, difference. The kind of clustering and the kind of activity that I just described doesn't exist anywhere else in the United States. It maybe exists in a handful of other places in the world. We're talking about a dense cluster of manufacturing, design, supply in a mixed-use district in a center city. That's absolutely a unique resource. So I think that's a good place to start in terms of strengths.
Yes, and anybody have anything to add to what Jerome said?
You know, I have 5 different clothing companies, and of the 5 different clothing companies, all of them have a large percentage of their business in manufacturing in New York City. And New York City is critically important to us to be able to manufacture clothes quickly, to manufacture clothes efficiently. And a lot of what's going on in China right now is making it very difficult. The prices are rising dramatically. The labor force is shrinking. And you know, I see the opportunity of being able to manufacture and grow that center in New York City.
Great. Faced with these strengths, you know, I most of the audience realizes, as I do, that the city has worked with many different stakeholders to put a plan together for the future of the garments district and for New York City's fashion industry. City officials have to look not just at the impact on one industry, but also at the bigger picture. A question for Madeline. How does the city evaluate the costs and benefits of land use changes in the garment district? What factors do you consider, and what are the tools that you use for your calculations?
Well, instead of getting necessarily into the micro answer here, let me just take a stab at a little broader sense. The Garment Center is an important part of New York. The fashion industry is even a more important part of New York, and I believe that we've done quite a bit in terms of programs, in terms of innovation to help the entrepreneurial spirit of the designers, and to really make sure that the creativity stays within New York. So there's the fashion industry, and then there's the Garment Center. Only about 40% of the designers in New York use the Garment Center. I think that that's a pretty interesting statistic. You, Yoli, Nanette Lepore, Andrew, you are the leaders in using the Garment Center, but unfortunately, it's an industry that has dispersed. So there's
Although I do have to interrupt you right here. It's not just manufacturing that the garment district provides for.
Absolutely.
The garment district makes virtually all the samples that you see
Yes.
during Fashion Week.
Yes.
Without that happening, there would be no fashion industry.
And all I'm really trying to say is that the fashion industry is larger than the Garment Center. I'm not taking away
It is.
anything that the Garment Center has to offer. So in terms of a vision for the Garment Center, one would want it to be the center of this creativity. One would want it to be where the samples continue to be made. It would be a place, hopefully, in the future where we could see some specialties really concentrating in, and the future of the fashion industry in the short runs, in being able to get to the marketplace. Some of the orders that come more quickly, that it's more difficult for Asia to turn out. We should be looking at that within the Garment Center.
That's precisely why we're
Right.
here.
Now, having said that, in terms of the zoning issues, right now, there's 9 million square feet of manufacturing within the Garment Center, zoned for the Garment Center. There's approximately, maybe, I know this is a disputed number, but about 1 million square feet of manufacturing within the Garment Center.
The last data that was collected was 1.6 million square feet.
Okay. I'm not going to dispute 1.6 or 1. I think that the number is slightly fluid, but that's okay. Even saying 1.6 is fine. The fact of the matter is very restrictive zoning has not aided the garment district from continuing to be the manufacturing hub for garments. And in fact, across the United States, annually, there's been an 8% decrease in garment manufacturing, everywhere. And we started with 900,000 manufacturing jobs in 1990, and now we're down to about 175,000 jobs in the US. We currently have 175,000 jobs, fashion jobs in New York now, but the number of people who are actually working in the manufacturing industries is much smaller than that. My point is that zoning and how we look at the zoning and trying to protect the industry, which I think we all want to protect within the Garment Center, and yet realizing that the very restrictive protections that have already been put in place haven't been working. So it is a very difficult question to answer. about how we would calculate that. I will say, though, after, as you well know, I've been looking at this project for several months now, not several years, but the answer is not only the zoning, it's not only the real estate, but it's in figuring out what it is that the Garment Center can excel in. And how are we going to get support from the entire industry, including the city, in making sure that that happens? And that is really what we're looking at. We're looking at it as a holistic issue. It's not as a zoning issue and not as a real estate issue.
Can I just pick up on that? I think that's a very important point, that this is not solely a question of zoning and land use. You talked about vision for the Garment District. My own vision, the Design Trust's vision, would be that when you talk about the Garment District as a neighborhood, just focusing on the Garment District, not the citywide fashion industry, you would use the existing manufacturing, supply, and design assets that you have, what the Garment District excels at. Use that as a starting point. Use that core of creative activity and production as the basis for your future planning. And use that core to create value, right? Because when we talk about highest and best use, we're talking about creating value for property owners, for the city. And why not leverage the existing assets you have, which, as we've talked about, are unique in the country and the world? Use that as the basis for your plans for the neighborhood.
Yoli, to add, the 40% number for the Garment Center, I think you have to look at yet another recent study. We've done a lot of studies. Another recent study that showed 80% of the volume is at least among study participants, is done outside of the Garment District. That would suggest the Garment District is irrelevant. You take another spin at the same study, and 80% of the revenue, 80% of the payroll, 80% of the jobs are in the Garment Center. So you say, all right, what does that data point mean? What that data suggests is that what's being made in the Garment Center is of high value. What has been being made outside the Garment Center is of low value. Low value means t-shirts. And I'm not putting down t-shirts. I hope everyone in the room is wearing one. But they don't translate to jobs. And the numbers actually substantiate that metric. So I think we have to look at the high value jobs. Where are they? They're concentrated in the Garment Center. The high value use, well, it supports design and creativity, which I think everybody has hammered home over and over again. If we pull manufacturing out, what happens to design? And you can ask two people on this panel and many more in the room who are involved in design. They can't make prototypes. They're 2 steps, 3 steps removed from the make. The make is highly iterative with design because make says you can't put that buttonhole there. You can't locate that pocket there. You can't sew that invisible zipper. And design takes those cues and modifies their product and innovates with that information. Remove it, and they're sketching on paper. They're removed from the physicality of making clothes.
I mean, I think what Madeline said is right. The clothing industry is so vital to New York City for so many different reasons. And I think the opportunity to evolve the Garment Center and to help and relook at how some of this can be better organized and how we can improve the manufacturing in New York City. I think there's a big opportunity for manufacturing in New York City, and I think the opportunity is to really relook and study how we can do something that both works for designers and works for the manufacturers. And you know, I'm very inspired by the idea of trying to create a state-of-the-art manufacturing complex in New York City where you pull a lot of these manufacturing disciplines together, where designers can go and work with pattern making and sample making and cutting and manufacturing facilities to build, build their collections and build their concepts. And New York can be sort of an exciting center for that. Not too dissimilar, in my opinion, to what happened in LA with jeans and T-shirts. I mean, jeans and T-shirts, LA has really done an incredible job in owning that business. I think New York City has a great opportunity in doing the same thing in tailored clothing, dresses, and all of that kind of product.
Very good. I am glad that you stated that, because my question that was directed at you was, how do we achieve what's been illustrated? It wasn't about the threat of zoning alone, because you're Economic Development Corporation. And if we all share this desire, as we do, how do we achieve it? And that's the reason why I asked you about policy. You know, how does policy help us?
Well, first of all, unlocking some of the value within the Garment Center. So the question is not just how do we unlock it, but how do we unlock it that we don't put it in jeopardy?
That's right.
So that's the first thing. And then what are we unlocking it for?
Right.
And that's the second thing. And we have to be really careful that whatever we choose to unlock it for is going to support the garment industry and not destroy it. And the idea of just creating space or moving people around isn't necessarily getting at the core issues. And, you know, we've all had this conversation about also the quality of manufacturing or the quality of the manufacturing spaces. If we're going to compete even in a small portion of tailoring or whatever it is that we do really, really well here, then we have to make sure that the manufacturing is done in a way that the designers will support it, that the designers will want to use it, and that the spaces are competitive, at least in a high-tech way that the Asians have. Now, we'll never have 500,000 square feet of horizontal space to create everything, and we know that. We're New York City, we don't have that kind of space. But we have the technology, we have the smarts, we have the innovation, we have the creativity to really start putting our heads together to create some space here that becomes an example of what the rest of the manufacturing industry needs to become here if we're to be successful. And, you know, I may be speaking a little bit out of turn here, maybe a little bit ahead about, you know, all of our plans, but, you know, I have to speak to what I see in terms of where I think we need to move towards. So I look at this as an opportunity, not as, you know, the Garment Center is in trouble, the Garment Center doesn't have a future. I think the Garment Center has a future, and I think we have to be very precise about what that future is. And the one place where I disagree with you, Yoli, is we're never going to get consensus from everyone that this is the right idea. I've never worked on a project that everyone
How does that disagree with what I said?
No, I think you said that everybody can, you just mentioned, I think in your opening remarks, that we have to find something that everyone can agree on. I'm just saying from my experience,
No, you have a
that'll
lot,
never happen.
excuse me, don't misunderstand. What I said was that we have a lot of stakeholders to satisfy.
Right.
So don't misinterpret.
That's fine. All I'm saying is that we will never satisfy every stakeholder here, but we have to make sure that we satisfy
Enough of them.
enough of them that we get this moving forward.
Madeline,
Don't forget, we're on the same page.
Yeah,
I
Madeline,
think we are on the same
I
page.
know we are.
I think if we could,
Same page or same stage?
Page,
Same
stage,
page.
everything at once.
I think if we could do something like you're talking about, it would be very exciting, and you'd get a lot of support.
Yes,
from
but
the
I have a
industry.
next question, which I'd like Joe to address. To enable this to happen, what kind of investment do you think that the domestic garment industry needs to fulfill this vision?
You know, the New York manufacturer has sewing quality nailed down. That is absolutely, if you were to isolate all the aspects of manufacturing, there's cutting ability, there's sewing, there's pattern making, there's administration, where administration is managing the process of acquiring the raw material, getting them in the right quantity, in the right color, in the right quality, to the right location at the right time, and then the pattern making, the cutting and the sewing takes place. Those technical issues of pattern making, cutting, and sewing, New York is very, very strong. You have a trained, skilled, artisanal workforce that has been sewing on average for 27 years. It takes 10 years to build one of those technicians. Those technicians are built. They're working right now. They are sewing. They're making garments. They're making high-value garments. It's happening in the Garment Center. The administrative piece, getting the right fabric, the right raw material to the right location at the right time. If you turn the clock back 20 years, the designer, the design manufacturer, the designer would perform all of those functions. In the world we live today, Asia performs all of those functions. That was born mostly out of being remote. They're far away. So they said, you know what, we will handle all the logistics and administration for you. The designers now have been weaned on Asian service, where it's easy. It's just easy. You go to one location, and all those functions are administratively handled for you. New York still has the cut, the sew, the technicians, but that front-end administration needs to be built. So I think, to answer your question, what are the investments? The investments that we need to make, more than anything, is for that front end, that administration. And we're looking at, there's a lot going on right now with software and with technology that can take a skeleton administration and make it very, very powerful. In fact, the Asian vendors are adopting the technology right now because their wages are going up. They don't want an army of office people just as we don't. And so I think adopting that technology, understanding what that technology is, making the right investments to build up the service level so that New York can provide full service, building and leveraging on what it owns, which is that technical ability. That's the investment that needs to happen. That's one of the investments. The other investment, it's space. New York, you need to house all of this somewhere. It needs to be clean. It needs to, the windows, the bathrooms. I mean, the economics of the factory business are so tight that basic infrastructure, basic space is tough to come by. It's scarce. When you do find it, it's not the spiffiest of locations. So I think a basic investment in clean white box so that manufacturing has a house, has a home for all these wonderful technicians who are real. They're real people, real jobs. And at the same time, the investment in administration, in administrative capabilities so that Andrew and Yoli can say, would you please organize the purchasing of fabric, the purchasing of trim, get it to the right location at the right time, and then let your wonderful technicians do their magic and produce clothes. The investment in space and administrative needs to be understood, quantified, and happen in order for us to take us the next 50 years.
Any comments?
I think it's doable.
All right.
You know, we have all the creativity here. Why are we forcing them to go elsewhere to manufacture? I think you can do it here. I think given what's going on around the world, I'm telling you, I manufacture clothes in China. I manufacture clothes here. It's getting increasingly more difficult to manufacture clothes in China. The labor prices are going through the roof there, transportation, so on and so forth. The stores are making it more difficult because they want to buy less up front and they want to reorder more. I think that circumstances are such that this could happen in New York City and should happen in New York City.
All right.
Andrew, I have a question for you, which is, you know, a lot of the designers, I mean, you are a unique person here. Well, we know you're a unique person here, but in the fact that so many of these larger designers are owned by massive public companies and then tend to have more bean counters who become the CFOs or COOs of these companies. And, you know, the first thing that happens is that they start driving, you know, they start outsourcing and driving, you know, for the last dollar, you know, to manufacture outside of New York, outside of the United States. How do we how do we, I mean, you're unique in that you have this vision, which we love, and you also have people that you have to respond to, but how do we change that, you know, how do we shift that so that, and how do we become more convincing to some of these people that it's worth their while to even maybe spend a little extra money, and what that is, I'm not sure, so that we can bring certain types of manufacturing back here?
You know,
Or is that possible?
I mean, I think that things change, you know, and what was, you know, what was attractive about manufacturing overseas, I think, you know, things have changed, and it could be attractive to manufacture here. And I think a little bit, if we organize and build something that really works and makes sense, I think they'll come. And I think that American designers, American companies will support American manufacturing.
You know, we should also say that it's already happening now. Even the major brands, they do produce in New York to some extent. It may be a very small percentage of their overall business, but during Made in Midtown, we interviewed this executive at a brand who will remain nameless. And he said, yeah, we produce roughly 3 or 4% of stuff here in New York because of the factors I mentioned earlier. You can do it faster, you have better quality control, you have relationships with certain factories who know exactly the style, the look that you've developed over years. So it's not necessarily a question of getting them to commit at all, but it may be about raising the percentage of what they produce and it still makes sense for the company.
I mean, I don't see ever manufacturing 100% of what I do here. It doesn't make sense, right? But I do see manufacturing, I do see it very important to manufacture a percentage of what I manufacture here in this country. And I think given the opportunity, lots of other designers, manufacturers could see the benefits also. And again, not for everything they make, but for a percentage. And I think there's a real opportunity to have it grow from where it is if it were organized in a more exciting manner. I think that's one of the problems. It's not really organized it's organized in a way that I think worked in another
In a different era.
I think in today's era, there's been a lot of advancement in technology and so on, and we're a little too fragmented. And I think it needs to be pulled together.
And I think that with the right vision, and if we enable it to happen, New York can be the case study for aging industrial cities throughout the country.
I think it would be so exciting for the designers to be able to have this kind of a setup for them. And I think it would be very inspiring for them.
You know, to answer the question of large public companies' pressure for margin, especially large public companies, they really understand a portfolio concept. They need to mitigate risk. They don't want to put all their eggs in one basket. And the basket that you need to fill for New York, relative to the size of a very large branded manufacturer, is so small. 1% of a very large branded manufacturer's production would fill 5 factories. I mean, it really is, it's those kind of numbers. I think to Andrew's point, you need to level the playing field so that you don't proposition the large branded manufacturer and say, if you want to work with us, you have to work differently. You have to say, you work with us, you work with every other vendor as you do with every other vendor throughout the world. Yeah. And that's the piece where we need to make an investment.
I think there's another issue. I mean, it's not a New York issue. It's more of a Washington issue, which Jolie, you and I have talked about on many occasions. There is no fabric industry in America anymore. And the duty on imported fabrics is very high. Even if you just cut the duty on imported fabrics in half, you would have a flood of manufacturing opportunities in not only in New York City, in the States, because it would make it much more advantageous. So there's, you know, I think there's lots of opportunity here.
Yes, it's a vision for New York City, but it's also a vision for the country. You know, light manufacturing is something that we need to sustain. You know, we can't just our economic policies can't be just about service industries,
Yeah, no, we have
financial industries. You know,
Absolutely.
there has to be a viable future that provides diversity in jobs for every American.
Right. We just finished a designer study. We just completed a manufacturing study. And we are also just completing an industrial study because we do see value in the kinds of jobs that industries bring to New York, and agree that, at least at EDC, we agree that it can't be just service jobs and can't be just financial jobs, and we have to diversify, and we have to be able to provide jobs for people who just have a high school education. So it is something that's quite on our minds right now.
Yeah. Well, we want to help. Sketch out your steps.
We sketch them out together
Okay.
because we have to all be partners in this. It has to be, it's not about what the city can do, it's about what the designers, the manufacturers,
It's
and
really
the
about what
city
the people can do.
Really, it's everybody in this
It's
together.
all of us.
Yoli, you'd asked before, how do we make this work? Right, there are clearly a lot of common interests, both here today in this room and in the larger manufacturing, design, property owner communities in the Garment District and in New York City. And you had said something about getting out in front of, or getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, so I want to do that too. For the Design Trusts project made in Midtown, we want to spend the next year or so developing recommendations for how do you support the industry and help revitalize the neighborhood. But I think some of the issues that we're dealing with in a kind of broad outline are, number one, there's this economic gap. There's a rent gap between what factories can pay and what other uses, whether it's hotel, office, the revenue that can be generated by these other uses versus factories. I think that's an economic reality that the city's looking at, the property owners complain about. So how do you deal with that gap? I think there are a couple ways. One way is to provide support to the factories, whether it's through some kind of subsidy, as the city subsidizes other industries, or it could be through a kind of branding campaign, Made in New York City or Made in Midtown campaign that results in more orders for factories. There is so much desire for new fashion in New York City and in the country and in the world. And you see that in the kind of attention that runway shows get and Project Runway gets, and the kind of celebrity status that fashion designers have. Excuse me. Is there a way to leverage that into a branding campaign that would trigger in the consumer's mind, oh, there is an importance to buying stuff that's made in New York City? Because that would boost factory orders.
You have two projects that dovetail, urban farming and locally made. So, I mean, I think that the real answer to my mind is to get the consumer to care where their clothes are made. That's the heart of it. You
I
know,
mean, the first thing, though, you have to make the quality. It has to be.
Of course.
You know, you have to really. That's why I think getting the level of manufacturing up in New York City is critical.
yes, the innovation and creativity is there. So if the quality is there, you have almost a win-win situation.
Right. The branding is, I agree, is very important, but it's the cart before the horse type of issue. The branding will be really more important once we figure out how we can get the manufacturing and the design community and everyone in lockstep to figure out how to move forward here. And there's a lot of issues with the manufacturers in terms of, there's, as you said, the administration issue, the software issue, the space issue, the business development issue. We find that 70% of industrial businesses in New York City are family owned. Most of these people don't have a plan for what's next. And that's a problem. you can't think about, I mean, Joe, you're,
Madeline, I have to hit on that one because 70% of capital-intensive industrial businesses are owned by family, and there's a succession plan question mark. In our industry, the new owners grow up in the factory. Your best manager, and it's almost a forced upward move. You're going to have 5 managers. They're all very, very capable. One of them finally says, "I'm ready," and a new factory is born, and an entrepreneur goes out and strikes. And I've seen that over 23 years. I've seen spawn from my factories at least 30 factories, and it's that upward cycle where there's no room. The manager has to go out, and we help them. You want to see that. That's a positive step. So the succession plan, I do not see it. I do not live it. Not in New York, not in Manhattan, not in the last 23 years.
Silence. Okay.
Sorry.
I'm not
No.
going to get into a debate about that. I think that, I'm glad you haven't seen it.
Well, to continue on the branding process, I have a question for Andrew, which is how can we engage the fashion world to support local production?
I think it's sort of all about the building it, and they will come, and having the level of quality and the level of efficiency necessary. I mean, it's something I see as so critical to, and such a great opportunity for our industry. And I mean, I start lots of companies from scratch. I mentor and help lots of young designers and so on. And I think something like this can be insurmountable in helping them, really make it. And I think it's a great opportunity. And I think that if you build it, there will be a lot of support for it. And I can visualize what it could be. And I grew up manufacturing clothes in the U.S. My dad, my grandfather, so on. So I totally am inspired by the opportunity to continue that.
So Andrew, what is it in the manufacturing, in the garment district with all the manufacturers that you see is, needs to change?
I think Joe touched on some things, and I think it needs to be pulled together. It needs to be, you need to have a complex where there is all the different facets necessary so that a designer or a company's manufacturing people can go in and they can really go from A to Z the same way they would do in Asia, or the same they would do in another country. And I think that the administrative stuff that Joe talks about, the technical capability is there. The technical capability is definitely here. I mean, a lot of the factories don't look well. They're sort of spread out. And some of them, as I say, the factories I work with, I've been working with for 8 or 10 years. I don't know whether I 100% agree with Joe on this succession thing, but he was very effective in his presentation.
So even if it was a good succession plan, it's the business development that still needs a lot of help here.
We should emphasize.
I think they need a bigger thinker helping them pull it all together.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We should say that we're not talking about overhauling manufacturing. We're not talking about reinventing the wheel. This is something that fundamentally works, and it works well. And it's in New York City now. It's not just an opportunity, it's happening right now. The study that you mentioned that EDC conducted among designers, we quote some of the results on our website. I think the numbers are 80% of emerging designers said that they think that the garment district is either very important or extremely important to their firm. And that number is 70% for established designers. So whether you're a startup company or someone like Yoli, those numbers are very high in terms of how do they view the manufacturing and supply cluster and the core of activity that you have in New York right now.
Right, but the established designers, it's really the core is in the samples right now. And the samples alone will not sustain the garment center, and that is the issue. So I don't totally agree with you when you say it's already there and it's working well. I don't think it's necessary. I think some of it works well, but if it worked well, we wouldn't see the 8% decline that we're seeing every year.
But Jerome, didn't our study also say that we're in a very fluid state? Because as the world changes and manufacturing overseas becomes tougher, something will return to our shores. And, you know, the thing that I would hope does not get separated is that manufacturing is really essential for creativity to happen. You know, you can't magically design something on a piece of paper. You need that process. Within that process and within the hands that handle the clothes, innovation occurs. It is just not just one designer in an atelier. It is many hands, many people cutting, sewing, trimming, packing, and shipping. I mean, it's the whole enchilada.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important takeaways that we hope people get from madeinmidtown.org, which is that design, manufacturing, and supply are absolutely linked. You know, and I think people in New York today, whether you're shopping at H&M or you're a city official, they understand the value and importance of design. You know, everyone gets it. Bloomberg gets it. The administration gets it. Average New Yorkers gets it. But I think making that link between the garment that you're buying on the rack and what it took to produce that, and how many hands the garment passes through, how many specialists are needed to realize that from paper to finished product. I think that's one of the things we most emphasize on the website.
I mean, one of the things you have to understand too, Madeline, is that the industry is changing. As I said, the manufacturing prices in China are changing dramatically. And it isn't like, oh, you can go to Vietnam or someplace else. There's not the infrastructure of manufacturing to do that. So the prices are increasing. The prices are increasing where soon I think the prices in China are going to be higher than the prices are to produce here when you add all of the different duties and freight and everything else. The other issue is that retailers are wanting their inventories lower. They're wanting to buy less and reorder more. They're wanting manufacturers to be quicker in servicing the business. Manufacturers that are going into their own retail business need to be quicker in servicing the best sellers. So I think there are a lot of reasons why manufacturing a portion of your business in the U.S. is important. It's not important. You can't manufacture 100% of your business in the U.S. It's not going to be that way. But being able to manufacture a portion of your business in the U.S. is necessary in order to service your business for the future.
I agree with you.
And connecting the making with the creativity
Well,
is
that's
at the
other-
heart of
that's
it.
The big, that's
But
another
Madeline,
issue, which I
We
totally
have
agree
10
with.
minutes left for questions from the audience. So I'd like to open the conversation for questions.
I'm sorry, I was looking for a mic. I'm just curious, in terms of the issue of the industry needing to increase its capacity to be increasingly economically viable, who actually needs to engage in that kind of investment? I mean, in other words, where would that kind of investment actually come from?
I think,
the kind-
let me, you want me to try and take?
Yes, please.
The
Do you have a mic?
The basic suggestions that you're making in terms of increasing administrative capacity and increasing technological capacity to support increased administration, where would this investment come from? I mean, I'm very supportive of it, but I'm just, for the sake of playing devil's advocate.
So this is one of the few cases where it's not a chicken and egg question. It starts with work from the designers. And that work translates into economic activity where the investment could be supported. So without the work, there is no reason for investment. And if I were in the city's shoes, I'd say there's no demand, there's no business. Why bolster supply? So it is a demand side beginning, and it comes from the designer.
Does it become, is it about incenting demand?
That's
I think
however
that-
demand grows.
I think that, you know, the one leverage that the city has, again, is in the potential of unlocking some value of the real estate, but I'm in total agreement with Joe. You've got to have the demand there. Without the demand, you can build a beautiful factory and it'll stay empty. Now, you may build a beautiful factory and then the designers will get interested and you might have demand, but I think if you're going to make a big investment into something, you're going to want to make sure that someone is going to pass through those doors before you build it.
But I think we know the answer to how do you create demand, and it goes back to, I hate to bring it back to this, but it's about branding in a way. It's about, if you want to increase someone's desire for a kind of product, that's the consumer you're talking about.
Yeah, and a lot of that I agree. It's like, look what's happened with the green markets all around, buy local. I mean, people care that they buy fresh and local. So, but who really does look at, buy local garments? I mean, it doesn't resonate as much as it should. People should care more. I know since I've gotten involved in this, I'm looking at my labels now, where they're coming from.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I actually put it on the shoulders of the consumer. They have to understand where the clothes are made, and if they buy something cheaper, on whose shoulders the cheap comes from.
But I think that the demand issue is solved, is based on what's happening, as I said, in China, based on what's happening with retailers, their patterns. The demand is definitely there.
So the investment's already here.
I'm telling you that.
Thank you.
Can we have the next question?
I mean, my business is about prognosticating the future, so.
We have another question.
I have a comment and a question, and I have to identify myself as saying that I both write about this issue and own a family-owned, with a plan for the future, metal fabrication manufacturing company in Long Island City. We face a lot of the same issues, and I just want to point out something that Vin just pointed out to me, that the survey that was reported on yesterday noted that 57% of those questions said they would buy an item if it were marked made in New York. The energy is there, the demand is there. One of the reasons you're able to say, not justifiably, but some support for the idea that the industry is dying, or it was dying, is because over the years, many years, and some of us have been around long enough to have seen this, the Planning Commission, in its infinite wisdom, has been nibbling away at the garment industry in terms of its regulations and zoning. You're not going to get easy new investment in a district that has a new agenda hanging over it, straight out of Jane Jacobs. So my question is for two of you, actually. Planning Commission, when it talks about, and I don't think this is as true of economic development, but you do work together. When they talk about unlocking value in the district, it's only about real estate. It's not about the industry. So my question is also, for Jerome, in your study, have you looked at the impact of decades of erosion of the district on the erosion of the industry? And to you, Madeline, my question is, what do you mean by unlocking the opportunity if it isn't just about real estate other than manufacturing real estate? What is it? And how do you envision making it worthwhile for new investment to come to a district with the security of knowing they won't be upzoned at some future point?
Can I start? Since you got the A part, or do you want me to?
I will start. We don't have something on the site that says this decision resulted in exactly this number or some measurement of decline. We know there's factors out there that have contributed to loss of firms, loss of jobs. I think what we're looking at for the future in our phase 2, when we work with the city, work with all the stakeholders that have been mentioned to figure out how do we make it work in the garment district. It starts with what Madeline said very early on, is how do we maintain the core of manufacturing, supply, and design activity. That's a fundamental priority. And then how can we use that to leverage value in the district? So for instance, right now, if you walk the streets of the garment district, the incredible creative talent and activity and production that we're talking about is largely invisible. Is there a way that you could increase the industry's visibility, increase the visibility of all that activity to boost orders for factories, to boost consumer demand for companies that are producing in New York, and to attract higher rent-paying tenants to fill vacancies in the garment district, which are higher than in the surrounding neighborhoods? Can you find that balance that is a win for the industry, is a win for designers, and is a win for property owners? That's the balance that we're looking for.
Jerome, I have a question to add on to what you just said, though. Did we actually look at the impact of non-enforcement of the zoning on the decline? Is there a relationship between the two things?
I'm going to quote Adam Friedman here. He's the head of the Pratt Center. He's been working on this issue much longer than I have. I heard him talk at a panel discussion. He said, for all the complaints about the 1987 zoning district, which basically put into place these protections for manufacturing space, for all the complaints about lack of enforcement and unfairness to property owners, that thing has worked remarkably well in terms of the core of activity in the garment district has weathered the decline in the national national manufacturing decline much better than in other places. There has been a core of preservation in the garment district you don't see in other manufacturing industries, both here and nationwide. Go ahead.
What you do see in the Garment Center, though, is we did a little quick survey throughout the Garment Center in August just to see what's going on the ground floors, what's going on from what we could see was going on in the building. And I would say that this is not scientific as our other studies are, but there was probably close to a third of what I would probably consider not compliant with zoning, storefronts, and probably what's going on above them, although, as I said, this is not scientific. A lot of that is because we have 9 million square feet that has been restricted through this zoning, and we don't have, whether it's 1.6 or 2 or whatever, million square feet for manufacturing, we don't have as much. So we do have to figure out what are those creative industries that are synergistic that can be allowed in the Garment Center that will not drive up the price, of some of those buildings that we need for manufacturing. And then the other part of that is that within looking at the zoning, which we're working very closely with Department of City Planning on, is how do we also change the uses within the manufacturing zoning to update them, because enforcement will actually get rid of a lot of the garment district types of uses, because they're more office uses or computer uses or uses that are not written into the zoning as manufacturing, and that's where we need to update the usage of these, because an inspector could come in and now get rid of or find a use that is working on manufacturing, but working in a new technology in manufacturing. So we need to do, within the zoning, context of zoning, look at not just what the zoning and the FAR is, but also look at what the new uses might be that will support manufacturing.
I think we have time for one final question.
Hi. This question, I'm glad the discussion kind of went towards the demand side, and I'm curious to know, I mean, there seems to be a difference between end users in the case of the samples versus a production line. And I'm curious to find out about kind of the proximity to markets and the potential of cradle-to-cradle kind of life cycle analyses in terms of innovating the manufacturing process to account for, new systems of, a life cycle in terms of the materials and the usage of those materials in that process.
Can we do one thing? Could we have everyone who's been patiently waiting to ask their question, just ask the question, then maybe we can try and do a roundup
Good
answer.
idea. Any other questions forthcoming?
I was also looking to hear from the rest of you about the concrete changes that you're calling on the city to do more. Is it changing zoning regulations? What other concrete things in terms of incentives, in terms of tax breaks, should the city be doing to help you?
Anybody else?
Just speaking of synergy, would there be a possibility of having a Savile Row type industry along to whet people's appetites for quality? And also, what about manufacturing really good shoes that are comfortable to walk in, that are not athletic shoes? Something, where you don't have to go to Spain or Italy or England to find something really good looking and comfortable.
That sounds like a startup idea. Yeah.
I wanted to ask how come we're not talking about investing in intellectual capital and creative capital much here today. There's a reason why FIT and Parsons are located where they are. This is core. This are where I assume our young designers will come out of. And there has been little discussion of it, and I'd like to hear some on what should we be doing to build on what we already have as a terrific design tradition and education in New York City, and make it even grander and greater, and of course related as closely as possible to industry needs.
Joe?
I'd like to take on the last one with higher education IP. I think there's a real need to have entrepreneurs, fashion designer entrepreneurs in particular, give them a better chance to succeed. And there's been a lot of focus on be a wonderful designer. Now, a lot of that is raw creative talent that needs to be channeled, and I think these schools do that now. There's a second piece, which is how does a designer get to do what they love in a sustainable manner? Well, they have to have a business. And the business disciplines are not really there for those entrepreneurs. And I think there's a real opportunity for either Columbia or NYU or Baruch, one of the 3 business schools that we have right in our backyard, to embrace this industry and move the young designer on an entrepreneurial path that's successful, that gets them through that early stage, gets them to early stage financing, and gives them business discipline so that they can do what they love. So I thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's a great point.
I guess we're wrapping up, so any other comments?
Well, I would say quickly that EDC will soon be announcing another suite of fashion programs and that address entrepreneurship. As you know, we started the Fashion Incubator. We work closely with some of the schools. So I think you'll be seeing quite a bit of that happening. And in terms, once again, of the zoning, incentives, tax breaks, we need to first figure out what we're giving them for. What's the program? The program comes first, and then we figure out how we have to get there.
forget to mention NYC 2020.
And yes, NYC 2020, please visit the website and visit the incubator as well.
I don't think there's ever been a shoe industry in New York City. I think that shoes is going to be very hard to manufacture.
You know, the original
Thank you,
shoe
everybody.
industry was on Duane Street where I live. It's gone.
Thank you.